Hello and welcome to the Modern Year podcast, where we take a look at classic and favorite albums. I'm Trevor.
And I'm Barrick. And today we will talk about the 1990s classic Nirvana's Nevermind. Nevermind was released on the 24th of September in 1991. It contains 13 tracks and it was produced by Butch Vig.
And recorded in Sound City. Great documentary about that.
The members of Nirvana were Dave Grohl, Chris Novoselic, and Kurt Cobain. And it was basically that the very famous Dave Grohl was supposed to start with Nirvana, because at the first album, that wasn't a major one. He was not part of the group. That I also learned during that process.
I thought he was in there the whole time. I didn't know that.
I saw it too.
He was like the seventh drummer. Crazy.
Yeah, it was the first aha moment I had under that review.
And the fact that they recorded the whole album basically twice.
Yeah.
Like they had it recorded without Grohl, with the old drummer, and then they got in a fight with him because he wanted more input. He left and Grohl came in.
And that is a really, really big what if in music history. What would happen if he wouldn't have joined Nirvana? I would guess Nirvana would have become still very big. But what happened to Dave Grohl? I mean, he's a great musician. Right now, you can argue he was twice on top of the rock pantheon. Once with Nirvana, once with the Foo Fighters. But that is, I think, a quite interesting story.
We should do a deep dive someday on just Dave Grohl, the history of Dave Grohl.
Maybe we should. But let's first stick on Nevermind. So the process was that we both had a first listening to the album without reading any reviews or any big stories why this album was so big and so influential, which we basically, of course, knew.
I did not. I couldn't stand Nirvana.
You did not?
I did not like Nirvana at all before listening to this album.
Okay.
We'll find out. We'll find out if I do like Nirvana now, or we'll see.
Yeah. Then that makes the whole discussion even way more interesting, because you grew up in Canada, and when it came out, you were basically.
I was 9 when it came out.
Yeah. Same. I was 8.
Yeah. Not that much of an influence on me at that age. No teenage angst with 9, but
yeah.
And I grew up on completely different music. Like I grew up on R&B and like the old 50s classics and
yeah. And for me it was different, especially as I have a 10-year older brother, and he was so big into music. So he was 18. So he was basically the generation of Nirvana. And I remember till today that right when Nirvana came out, or just shortly after Nevermind, we got MTV. And it was such a big thing for my older brother and my older sister, which is 5 years older. And all the time my parents were out, they just had MTV on. And there were, as I remember, only 2 songs playing, basically. It was Guns N' Roses with the live version from the Wembley Stadium, Knocking on Heaven's Door. And then it was Nirvana with Smells Like Teen Spirit. And I think already also Lithium. And that is the first thing I had in my mind when it comes to Nirvana. And of course, I didn't understood what Kurt Cobain stand for and all that stuff. The only thing I knew was that it has an impact and that it was super cool for the person that came out. So that is the reason I had a lot of pictures in my mind already from a very young age. And later I was also, as a younger teenager, listening to Nirvana, but it was always more about the sound, never really that much about the attitude, which I understood kind of, but never had a really deep dive into that band. My first favorite band was Pearl Jam. That really was very close to that whole grunge genre and all that stuff. So yeah, Nirvana was there, but it was not that big of a topic for me.
They were never there for me. Not even in my teenage years. I was dreading it. My wife was just sat there laughing. Why would you pick this album as your first one? Like, well, got to start somewhere, and better to do it with some better way to test the whole process that we thought up.
So then let's dive into it. So when you put it on, when you start listening to it last week, what was your first reaction?
My first reaction, I didn't know there was this many actual like I know the Nirvana songs. I started
Mm-hmm.
listening to it. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I know that one. I know that one. Like Teen Spirit, yeah. Smells Like Teen Spirit. Everyone knows it smells like Teen Spirit. And then I listened to. I just need to call up a track list quickly.
Yeah.
So there smells like Teen Spirit, In Bloom, Come As You Are, Breed, Lithium, Polly. I knew all of those. I know Drain. I heard Drain You. I'd heard Something in the Way. All those I already knew. They just weren't stuck in my head that they were all from one album. I thought that because they were all from this one band, Nirvana. I knew they were Nirvana, but I didn't know that it was one album. All these songs came from that one album, which is that's pretty tight. That so many songs that everybody knows come from just one album. That doesn't happen very often.
True. It shows again how big that album was, and I have to say I was a little bit shocked that "Smells Like Teen Spirit" was the first song. You know, I've listened to "Smells Like Teen Spirit" I don't know how many times in my life, even on parties or MTV or whatever. But that this album had this song also as an opener, I I totally forgot, and that was my first reaction. That I thought, wow, that is a really big outcome party. Even when it's not the debut album, that is a big hit to start a record with.
My very first tour that I ever did was with a sound guy named Sean McLean, and he always told me, if you're ever out with a band, there's a specific way that you need to start a set for a concert, and the first song you play has to be absolute killer.
Yeah,
And that's exactly what they did.
yeah.
None of the start off slow, da 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 da. You need to get the audience into it, and that's what they did.
Start with a banger, and afterward, it, as you said, it just continues that way. But that is just because the whole album is basically full of hits on its own way. I mean, In Bloom and Come As You Are both were also single releases. Then there's Breed, and then Lithium is also a single that they put out. And another reaction of mine was, what I'm listening to here is a punk album from great musicians. For me, it was longer tracks. I don't know why. I was never really a big punk guy. I, of course, know punk, but the whole sound was, for me, and the attitude that I could feel out of the album sounded for me like, well, that is really the new sound, like a new style of punk for me. Could you relate to that in any way?
I listened to punk, but when I was younger, just never grunge, and I'm just not. I don't like all the distortion, which is strange for listening to punk music, but I like cleaner sounds on guitars and stuff, and it just bothered me a lot when I first started listening to it, especially on "Come As You Are." There's this chorus on Kurt Cobain's guitar through the whole song that pisses me off so much.
Okay.
I cannot stand it. I listen to the song and I'm like, please just turn off this chorus. Just make your guitar sound normal. Distortion, good. This chorus and then chorus with distortion. No. But it's the effect he wanted. Like, it's written everywhere.
Okay.
It's a distinct sound, but I can't stand that sound. That bothered me even after researching the album and everything. I listen to it. I have to block it. I can block it out, but then you're blocking out like one of the main instruments. And it's the 3-piece. There's not that much to listen to if you block out the guitar.
Do you think this reaction is your professional you as a sound technician, or is it just you as a music fan that just don't like it?
No, it's my job. I can't stand chorus.
Okay.
I won't use it on anything that I mix. Just I don't like the sound of it.
Okay. Was there something that you immediately liked?
Every track, the rhythm section. It was, you just hear Dave Grohl is so amazing on the drums. Just the drums and bass, the whole album all the way through. It just drives it. And they get kind of the two of those guys, Dave and what's the bass player's name?
Chris Novoselic.
Yeah. Dave and Chris get very, very kind of pushed to the background when you think of Nirvana. Everyone thinks Kurt Cobain.
Yeah, that's true.
And he could write apparently good songs, but if you didn't have those guys actually driving the tracks, what are you going to have?
Yeah.
Like the drumming and the bass were just on point, tight.
And I think the story we told at the beginning with Dave Grohl is underlining it. I think Kurt Cobain was very aware of that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have searched so long time for the right drummer.
Yeah.
Because it was quite crucial. And there's a story about the song Drain You, where Kurt Cobain jammed. He had already written this song and jammed it with another friend that was a musician and said, it's not a Nirvana song because there are no any drums in it. And then just with Dave Grohl, he figured out, well, there is basically a chance for drums. And then it became a Nirvana song. So basically, just because they had a drummer like this, it went the way it were.
Drain You, also, Kurt Cobain said that's the best song on the album.
And I agree. So maybe we can skip
it.
forward. I think Drain You is my favorite song of this album.
At that point, I had written down, I'm starting to really get annoyed by Kurt Cobain's voice.
Really?
That was on my first listen through. This is how much I disliked Nirvana going into this. I got to track number 8 and I'm like, I hate this.
Really?
Why are Barrick and I starting this podcast with this album? Like seriously, torture to my ears. I couldn't stand it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then I wrote, thank goodness that the chorus guitar sound is gone. Because he used it in lots of songs. Yeah, that was my notes for that song. Was I'm getting very annoyed with his voice. Amazing rhythm section once again. Interesting breakdown, and thank goodness that this chorus guitar is done.
Oh, that's a good one. I have the opposite reaction.
The more I listened to it, I liked it.
I like how he uses voice. So I really think he used his voice quite powerfully. All his emotions that he put so much into it. Sometimes he's overboarding it totally, but I think it was quite powerful.
Well, the kicker for me with his voice is once I read that for Kurt Cobain, the lyrics weren't as important as the melody.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was writing some of the lyrics on Nevermind just before he went in to record them.
Yeah.
And I read in multiple articles that the text doesn't really matter that much. And once I read that and then re-listened to the album just focusing on the melody and not the actual words, I was like, oh wow, that's actually then I actually liked Drain You.
Ah, that's interesting. Are you actually, when in general or also the first listening, you have a deep focus on the lyrics?
Yeah, very, very much.
Okay.
Very much. I'm very text driven when I listen to music.
That is also a difference between our hearing, and some of that I think is because I'm German and I'm not a native speaker. And when I grew up with music like with Nirvana, I didn't speak English at all. So it was only about the all over sound. And it was also, again, I recognized when I listened to that album, it was only about the sound for me. So for some tracks, I made a more deeper dive about the lyrics, but I also figured out that, well, it has a couple of ideas from him, but as you said, it is so much is just an all over feeling, and what fits to that sound as the all over project, and that make the listening, I think, quite more easier.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that really has always bothered me with Nirvana, was because when I listen to music, I very much listen to the lyrics. It's very difficult to understand what he is singing in some songs. He even said with some critics, he's like, you guys write down my lyrics and you're writing down the completely wrong things. In the liner notes, they didn't have actual lyrics for the songs. They took like partial lyrics from songs and put them in, combined with Cobain's poetry. So in a time where you would take out a CD, look at the lyrics for a song, and be able to then sing along with it, with Nirvana, you couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And I think that was like, he liked it like that.
And on one part, it was, I think, very, very powerful. And on the other part, it for sure also gained a lot of frustration for him, because as you just mentioned, there was so many things put inside that he felt were not what he felt when he wrote this, and was still, yeah, such a big topic everywhere. So, and then he didn't like that position at all. So, which also fits quite good to the all over myth of Nirvana. So, but when we stick to the first listening, what else stood out for you as reactions?
The first listening, there was first 3 tracks, all bangers.
Yeah.
When I listened to track number 4, Breed, was actually on the first listening my favorite track on the album. They did really interesting things with the guitars, with panning it, which I really enjoyed. It made me think of, do you know the punk band Distillers?
Mm-hmm. I know just a couple of songs. Never really had a deep dive on them, but yeah.
Listening to that made me think of the Distillers, and I was like, oh wow, that, like, okay, you can see an obvious relationship where Nirvana has obviously been inspiration for the Distillers. And they have the album, I had the album Coral Fang by the Distillers, and I was like, oh wow, this really sounds like some of the tracks on Coral Fang. And then I started researching. Turns out, same mixing engineer on both albums. So there's also other reasons why they might sound the same.
Yeah.
Or similar.
Well, what stood out for me also at the first listening was it felt really like an album, that all of these songs has to be together on one record. I cannot explain really why.
Yeah.
All songs has their own identity, but the sound fits so good together. And as we just said, the lyrics are not one told story. It's like, I don't know, like a book or something. It really fits together, and it again shows why I think it's so important to listen to whole albums and not only to different tracks, like it is very popular right now with streaming and all that stuff. So
I don't think albums are even made the same now.
No, not at all. I think so too.
They're made for singles now.
Yeah.
Whereas back then they were also made for singles, but it was also, you're selling a complete album that people are taking home and listening to.
Yeah. And I think some songs just getting better in the combination of the other songs.
Yeah.
So my favorite passage basically is, as I said, my favorite song is Drain You. And I think the second favorite is Lounge Act, which comes directly after. And I think the combination of these two songs, so when you first listen to Drain You, makes Lounge Act afterwards even better.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. Lounge Act, once I did my re-listens, I actually really, really liked that one as well.
So that was also on the first listening, some thoughts I had. And even when I heard this album from my brother and my cousin in Denmark, who was a fan, a couple of times I was also kind of surprised that I knew all songs basically so well, just from listening anywhere. Not really as right now so focused, but it's very, very well known album.
You recognized even like Territorial Piss.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I'd never heard of that song.
But Territorial Pissing was also biggest song for friends of mine, because I was from the beginning into rock music. As I mentioned, I was 8 when Nirvana came out. I had an older brother. I never was really into pop music because he gave me the cool music, which I considered as the cool music. And my other friends, they started with, I don't know, whatever was in, and then later in their youth, they started listening to bands like Nirvana, so a couple of years later.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that Territorial Pissing was a song that they liked a lot. So then a friend of my, Boo Boo, he listened to that a lot, as I remember. So
that one and Lounge Act were actually the only two that I hadn't heard before, or that I don't recognize as hearing before. The rest, for not really liking Nirvana at all and never actively listening to them, I knew all but 2 songs on the album, which really, really surprised me.
Something else that stood out at the first listening for you?
Not really, I don't think.
Okay, then.
I liked the inclusion of the cello. I liked that.
Oh, yeah. Which song is that again?
That's on Something in the Way.
Yeah. Oh, that's also.
Which then was interesting reading about it later. I wrote down, is that strings on a Nirvana record? I do like that.
That's also a nice song. Yeah, and then going into the deep dive, what information you got that surprised you, or after reading didn't surprise you at all? So what information did you get?
Well, the surprising thing, like we had said earlier, was that Dave Grohl was not always a member of Nirvana.
Yeah, same for me.
Nirvana without Dave Grohl, I just can't imagine it. But if you look at lots of great bands, the Beatles were around before Ringo too. So
true.
But Ringo is not nearly as important as Dave Grohl.
And as you mentioned, how good the rhythm and the drums are, and how important, maybe that also is due to the fact that the producer Butch Vig is also a drummer. And
true, he did Garbage, right?
Yeah, he's the drummer, for example, of Garbage,
which I also didn't know until this.
After the first listening, I found a podcast where he was interviewed.
Yeah.
And he said that he thinks that, or the interview basically said that drummers very often are great producers. And the A has the theory that the drummers are always in the background and they can see everything. They always have a wider view. And he really liked that kind of theory. And he loved from the beginning also the work of Dave Grohl and how he approached the music. So that's also underlines the importance of that, I think.
One other thing that after reading about it a bit, that really surprised me, in a day and age now where everything is very much cut and paste in Pro Tools, they learned these songs, so they were recording it in 2 takes.
Yeah.
That does not happen anymore.
That
is a lot of practice. Like, they would do it separately. They all wouldn't be there. It would be Dave and Chris record first, and then Cobain comes in afterwards and records vocals and guitar. But still, the fact that it could be done in a few takes, hats off.
Yeah. And this is, I think, that also something that the producer mentioned is something that a lot of people are surprised of, because they always had the picture of Nirvana. They didn't take care of anything. So they're playing the music, but they don't give a shit about something. But when it comes to recording, it was super professional, and they were highly motivated to make a good album. And also Kurt Cobain was really hard working on in some ways, even when he sometimes, as you said, with the lyrics going just by inspiration, when it came to sound and all that stuff, they were quite motivated to make really great songs.
He really wanted to make things from pop music and include them in the album, which I found very interesting. When you first think Nirvana, you think just grunge, anti.
Yeah.
We don't care, whatever. That whole attitude from the grunge scene in the 90s. And like you said, they did care, at least about the music.
Yeah. I think also the producer mentioned that Kurt Cobain was half jokingly said that Smells Like Teen Spirit is basically my approach to write the perfect pop song.
Did you actually read about the name of the song?
Yeah.
That it came from one of his friends walked in and said, "Oh, it smells like Teen Spirit," and he thought it was like a in-depth teen angst kind of thing, when really it was the name of the deodorant.
And that's one of the funniest things I read.
That's awesome.
That the company that produced that anti-transparent, that the Teen Spirit stuff was bought in January of 92. So basically only half a year after that song and that album came out, was bought by Colgate Palmolive for over $600 million.
Probably because of that song.
Yeah, probably. And also that they had a lot of other stuff going on, but I don't know if that only was the reason, but I think it had a big impact on that time, especially as it peaked. I mean, it came out in September, but I read in January 92, it became #1 on the album chart, and the previous one was Michael Jackson, which was the biggest star of the 80s, with the best-selling album still till today with Thriller.
Dethroned the king.
And Nirvana came up. In my research, when I was reading about it, I didn't really focus that much on the technical part of the music. It was more to discover why Nirvana was so big. It felt at that time when I was young that they totally changed something, and still afterwards, what happens there? And I think there's a couple of things that a friend of mine just gave me the nice quote that music basically giving a language to things that cannot be put into words but are too important to left unsaid. And I think Nirvana they giving a voice, and they were showing an attitude that so many young kids just felt during that time. And Nirvana was like, hit them and said, well, that's how I feel. Even when they didn't even understand totally the lyrics, or they make their own construction, what they thought that it meant. And it could be that like 5 of these kids are in one room and they have different opinions about that. But that's also a strength of the music, that they put something out and do whatever you want with that, even when Kurt Cobain doesn't ever liked it. And it just hit the zeitgeist as good as maybe no other band since then did. That maybe was a very big part.
It was the perfect album at the perfect time. It was perfect timing. It was a generation coming out after the baby boomers that didn't really have an identity.
Yeah.
And basically Nirvana was that identity after that.
And when you look at
that attitude
at the 80s, what was big, for example, in rock, that was the hair metal scene from Los Angeles with the ridiculous hair stuff.
Hair metal, glam. It was the age of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. All the songs were about what they did to women and what drugs they took.
Big machoism, like the 80s anyway. That the capitalism peaked there basically, and they were totally the anti-hero of that. Well, to be so open with depression and all that stuff, even when the lyrics are quite elaborate, and that was quite new. I mean, Nirvana was one of the first bands. Today it is totally normal for a alternative rock band to say if you're homophobic and if you don't like people, other colors, stay away. But they did that at the beginning of the 90s, which was not quite common.
That wasn't common, and Cobain was like a hardcore feminist, which that surprised me too. I didn't know that. That's a huge turnaround from the rock and roll from the 80s.
That basically is also a big irony, right? they said, well, F the capitalism and all that stuff, and they became the biggest commercial success of a generation, basically, with that attitude.
Which pissed them off. They didn't want that.
Yeah, they didn't want that.
That's why their next album, In Vitro, is completely different and completely not pop. But then also sold millions and millions of copies.
So I think they could do whatever they want. They would sell anyway, big amount. And at the end, it broke him, right? Well, it's maybe it's a lot of things, but it's I guess
it's many things that led to that, though. He was doing the drugs and everything long before they got famous.
Yeah, of course. So it's a combination. If you're wired that way,
and the fame and touring makes it easy.
Yeah.
You don't pay for anything. You go on tour, people just give you stuff.
Yeah.
It really feeds the demons. That's why there's so many artists that have substance abuse problems.
And it doesn't make it easier when you're anyway addicted to heroin before you're getting famous.
Sad but true.
Yeah. And the even more interesting it is how differently a guy like Dave Grohl developed. He seems like a guy that really worked quite good later with his fame.
It would have been interesting to see where Kurt Cobain would be today if things hadn't ended up how they ended up.
And what we just said, it was the perfect album for the perfect time. Timing is always important also for stuff like this. Make me think, would this album, if it comes out today, still be a huge hit? What do you think?
I don't think so. I don't think you can even actually say a definitive yes or no. Because if you look at rock music today, if it wasn't for Nevermind, rock music wouldn't be what it is right now. It is the album that changed how modern rock music is perceived. You can hear hints of this kind of music in all of the rock from the late 90s, early 2000s as well.
Yeah, that's true.
And if it wasn't for this album, would there really be? I think that's the bigger question. If Nirvana never released this album, would there even be half of the music that came out in the late 90s, early 2000s? How many kids picked up a guitar because they heard Kurt Cobain playing guitar?
Yeah.
How many kids started writing music because of that?
Yeah.
They inspired a lot, I think.
And that's the other thing. Even when the bands don't sound like Nirvana, that is another part that I think it's quite crucial. A lot of people just start musing because of Nirvana.
Yeah.
That's a big topic. And that's something I explored a lot while reading about the importance. And when 20 years after the death of Kurt Cobain, there was like in the Times magazine, like 9 artists that said what meant to them. And there were like, for example, the frontman of Green Day that said, well, when Nirvana came out, for him, it was like, we have our Beatles. That's for him, that's our Beatles. And then he thought, oh, but maybe that happens later for generations too. And then he waited 10 years, nothing happened. He waited another 20 years, nothing happened. And now 30 years. And he said he thinks such a big thing for a generation didn't happen since Nirvana at all. For him, it changed just how he perceived music. And you can argue that we have different opinions, but totally they also became a big band and it had a big influence on him. And also in other genres, in this Netflix documentary, The Defiant Ones, about, for example, Dr. Dre.
Yeah.
In the first episode, I recognized the scene, and I rewatched it again, where he's sitting in the Bahamas in some fancy house in front of the notebook, and he's listening to Nirvana, and he's rocking, and he said, well, Nirvana, that's my favorite rock band of all time. Well, I don't know how much rock Dr. Dre is listening to, but afterwards I figured out quite a lot, even to Radiohead. And he could really relate to their also their attitude they had, these anti-attitude stuff.
Yeah, I could see that with Dre. With the West Coast hip hop in early 90s as well was very defiant and anti-establishment.
Yeah, totally.
It started with NWA and Public Enemy.
Yeah.
Then it came up with Tupac, who was basically the hip hop version of Kurt Cobain, minus the heroin. But
true.
That much, like influence wise.
Yeah.
What surprised you a lot in the research?
I don't know if there was something that really surprised me in the research. One Well, maybe we were going through the Rolling Stone list of the best albums of all time, for example, and Nevermind is on number 17. And it's the only album from the 90s, right? That was something.
It's the newest album in the top 50.
That kind of surprised me. So that has nothing only to do with Nirvana, also with their view in general. And they also had a list about the best songs, and Smells Like Teen Spirit was voted as the best song of the 90s from them, for example.
It was also, the whole album was best album of the 90s as well.
I don't know. It's something that came up. I researched also the video, and I think even on YouTube, Nirvana's "Smells Like Teen Spirit" is viewed over 1 billion times on YouTube. I mean, as I said, it was huge as a video in the beginning of the 90s, but now even after, it's such viewed like so often. It still is a big thing. I don't know if it's the old fans still, or it also is a big thing for younger kids again. So that was something that I was also a bit surprised of. It's one of the still most viewed music videos.
What really surprised me from the reading was my whole thing where I don't like Kurt Cobain's voice, and I'm bothered by the fact that I don't understand the lyrics, was the fact that for him the lyrics didn't really matter either that much. With the whole writing them just before you got in, he focused more on the melody, which is then what I did when I did the re-listen. I just focused on melody and tried to block out the actual text so I could actually, except for Polly, I actually listened to the text because that one is actually meaningful and sad and kind of messed up. But like a lot of them, once you actually, what I found personally, once you strip away the Kurt Cobain vocals, like the actual text that he's singing, and focus on the melody he's singing. In the second listen, I tried to actually listen because I'd read about the whole pop influence in the album. I tried to listen to the album then, and instead of hearing the distorted guitars, I was trying to hear what it would sound like with kind of clean guitars, less grunge sound, and more of a cleaner, just normal rock sound. And if you did that today, you would totally be in. Like, it sounds like a pop record if you just listen to the melodies. It's a pop rock record.
Okay, that's a good one.
At least that's what I found. I thought it was very interesting. You take away the text, listen to just the melodies and the music, and I tried picturing it without the distortion and grungy and dirtiness, that they're straight up like well-crafted pop songs or pop rock.
Yeah, and that is a very great mix to have such anti-attitude, such basically a raw sound, but still this pop song structure, I think.
That then made sense for me how they became so huge.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. For me, what I discovered, I didn't recognize it at the first listening, but afterwards it was so obvious, was these shift between loud and quiet in basically all songs. They have so often this change, like he's singing quite quiet and then it's going too loud, or the sound is switching, or all that stuff. They used it quite powerful, and I didn't recognize it at the first listening. At the second time, it was so much clearer for me how they work with that. Yeah, I think that also fits quite to the all over picture of Nirvana.
Yeah, they're very known for the dynamics of their songs. Yeah. But that was also, I think, I read it was I keep wanting to say the Kinks, but it wasn't the Kinks. It's based on a different band.
I think the Pixies were quite influential. Were also big in the 80s on this college rock scene, and that was also one thing, that there was this college rock in the 80s, but Nirvana made it basically that kind of stuff to the mainstream. And basically, you also could say like all this alternative rock scene that emerged in the beginning of the 2000s. Maybe that never happened without Nirvana in that style. And not only Nirvana, because the whole scene there in the beginning of the time was quite big, but they were for sure the poster boys. And I mean, there are some theories that they're bigger right now as they were in the moment because of the death of Kurt Cobain, but in the moment when you read this and see videos, they were super big. They were the biggest act in the world.
They were huge.
At beginning of '92, they was a phenomenon.
Did you actually find anything negative written about them the whole time, or about the album?
No.
Rolling Stone actually only rated it 3 stars. That I read.
Yeah. And they wrote about it too, but when you're reading the text basically about it, it's still not very critical.
No, not at all.
That is another thing that I also think there are some albums that when they came out, they're not critically acclaimed, but afterwards super big. And for Nirvana, it was big at the time and it was getting even bigger afterwards.
Yeah.
And as mentioned, when in the process after listening, I also thought about history of the last 30 years, which is also crazy. Next year it's 30 years old, that album. That means when Nirvana came out, going 30 years back, the Beatles just started. Still then, I think there was shortly afterwards, in that same period of time, basically in the mid-90s, there were Oasis.
Yeah.
They also became a global phenomenon, and they had also this old school rock attitude, like we're fucking rock stars. But afterwards, there was basically maybe some new metal stuff, and there was this whole beginning of 2000 scene, but there was not one big band where the whole world was ask now people who the Strokes are, just random on the streets. Nobody knows that when you're not into music. Nirvana, everybody knows. Everybody knows them.
The Strokes were kind of the band coming up that they were like, that's the next big influencer.
Yeah.
That's going to be the big band. But they had the one good album, and that was it. Their first album was fantastic. Is this it?
Yeah, it was great. I loved it.
I loved it. But everything after that, like, it didn't capture the vibe. It didn't move forward.
Yeah, totally. So when you put me on an island and I have to switch, if I take this first Strokes album or Nevermind with me, I would choose the Strokes album, from my personal opinion.
Oh, me too. I would 100% pick the Strokes.
Yeah, but I understand basically why this other album, or Nevermind, is way more.
We might be in a very small group that would pick that, though, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. Also, especially from other artists, I read a lot of great things. Like the guys from Arcade Fire were influenced by them. Even Jay-Z quote "Smells Like Teen Spirit" in Holy Grail, his song. He was also quite huge on them. As you mentioned, it comes in a totally different way in these, like Nirvana did it, but basically the attitude was not so far away from hip hop. So that was also not surprising. And there's this Lana Del Rey. I never really listened to her, but she's a big pop star now. She's officially one of the super big Nirvana fan. Weezer, also alternative legends. The main guy of Weezer said that he thinks he was the biggest Nirvana fan of the world. And when Kurt Cobain died, he couldn't even listen to music at all, or couldn't think about creating music at all, because he think nothing will ever be as good as this. So that really shows how big that influence was. And I don't know if that really changed the way I listen to it.
For me, that changed my view on Nirvana as a whole. Not really on the listening of the album so much, maybe a little bit, because you listen to it and you think, you picture what came after this.
Yeah.
What I found really interesting was I kept reading that the record label didn't really expect the sales that they got in the beginning. Like, they came out saying that Come As You Are is going to be the big hit. It was a hit, but nothing like Smells Like Teen Spirit. And they also did not expect the amount of sales that they got with the whole album.
Yeah, they run out of the album, right?
They sold out at first, and then they were selling like 300,000 copies a week, I think it was.
Yeah.
If you look at it today, that would never happen especially now with everything being online with Spotify and Apple Music. There's no album purchases anymore, but even just listens, you're not going to even come close to that for a whole album.
Yeah.
You're lucky if a song gets like to 3 million or 30 million listens, but that's a single song. This is a whole album that was doing just crazy numbers.
Yeah, overall, I think till now, roughly it was so like 30 million times. And when you have a look on the, as I mentioned, how often Smells Like Teen Spirit is streamed via YouTube and also via Spotify. Now the people just listening to it via that medium. That's it still just lives forever. That's really, really crazy.
In the States, it's diamond status. Over 10 million copies of the record sold. That's crazy.
And it was in the US in the top 200 billboards for over 250 weeks.
That is insane.
5 years.
That is insane. That is a long, 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 long time to stay that hot with one album.
Yeah, what also really stood out for me was the interview with the producer, and that the band really relates to him. And I think I could understand why, because he really explained his approach, that he said, well, at the end it's always only about the vision of the band, and I just help them to get rid of all of the things that's standing in the way and let them do their stuff, and be in the background asking them basically the right questions, giving a little bit of nudges and ideas, but mostly everything comes out of them. So I think they had and until then he said he produced already thousands of albums. He was produced a lot of punk bands, a lot of little stuff, and so he was really know his groundwork, but could relate to them, and I think that helped them also a lot. And he said he knew that it will be a massively hit when it was remastered during the process of the mastering. When it mastered and he was listening to it, he said, okay, damn, this will be the biggest album commercially and maybe also critically acclaimed that I ever will produce. It will never get bigger. And that gives him quite of anxiety at that time. And he immediately before it was published, he got calls from other producers who were listening to that. And because the record label spread it around and said, what have you done there? That is crazy stuff that will be so huge. So immediately had an impact also on the music industry.
Apparently in the studio they enjoyed the mix, but once it got released, I was reading that they were not happy about the way that Andy Wallace, who actually mixed everything, mixed it. They said it sounded too clean.
Okay. Said the band.
The band, yeah. But then Butch Vig even said, no, in the studio, we heard it in the studio. They were fine with it. We wouldn't have re-released it if they weren't happy with it.
His insights were also quite good to hear for me. So what do you think aged the best from the album?
Like which song?
In general, I don't know. Maybe some impact that it had till today, or whatever that comes to your mind.
The impact is for sure aged the best.
Yeah.
Because it's impacted music all over the place. I wasn't really liking Territorial Pissings, and basically that was the only song I really didn't like. But the ones that would stick out that I could see coming out nowadays and still being big would be like Come As You Are, Something in the Way, kind of the quieter, more subdued songs, where if you think about kind of rock music nowadays, I don't know that many bands now that are this like this is really, really hard driven music, and I don't think that really exists that much right now.
Yeah, it is a lot of between loud and quiet, but in general, as an all over product, it's a very loud album. It basically screams out so many things.
It's aggressive.
Yeah, it's aggressive. Yeah, it has a very certain kind of energy.
I don't see that kind of energy in music nowadays.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something that's missing now, where if this came out now, especially in the current circumstances we have in the world, maybe it would be something that a younger generation would get behind, something like this again.
Yeah.
Because this generation is kind of at the point, the teenagers now, I think, are at the point where the teenagers were when Cobain came out with, or when Nirvana came out with Nevermind.
Yeah.
They're kind of flying aimlessly in through the wind and without direction.
Yeah, that's why I think if it would come out today, even when, as we said, it's a strange idea because things happen because certain reason. At least Smells Like Teen Spirit, a couple of songs were big things. As the concept of the album doesn't exist anymore, I think this kind of attitude is still alive since then, and now even more.
Yeah.
The more I think about it, quite strange that there is not such a big youth culture since then. I think in music that's such a phenomenon because music basically is the best voice for the youth, because youth is what makes it big, right?
Yeah.
Because in that age you want to find your voice, you want to find your place in society, and you try to get out your feelings. You don't know how. You still have, in a positive way, maybe more naive view and more another aggression, and that's why some great new music only can evolve from youth, I think, which is interesting that such a big thing didn't happen since then, I think, but I have to think more about that.
No, I could agree with you on that one. What's the big modern young person singing? It's Billie Eilish.
Yeah.
I don't know that Billie Eilish is really breaking down any barriers with her songs. They're interesting.
Yeah.
And how her brother designs the actual backing tracks is interesting, but they're not pointing out anything wrong with society, really, are they? They're not becoming a voice of a generation.
Yeah. And the popular stuff, there is the problem, I think, especially with the lyrics, that I think it's very often more powerful when you write lyrics like Kurt Cobain did, that nothing is so clear, that there's so many ways for interpretation. And right now, I think most popular acts are basically afraid of that it could be put into a wrong direction. And you just have to listen to all that bad German music that's in the charts. It is so easy language that everything is just fine, and there's no room for any interpretation at all. So that's not that used as much, I think, right now. But basically, the times are right there for a youth culture. I mean, you just have to see that Friday for Future stuff and all that stuff. So basically, what's missing for them, it's a soundtrack, I think.
The soundtrack to the generation is gone. Although, like this, I would say Nevermind, that's not really our generation's soundtrack either.
No, it's the generation of my brother, as I mentioned.
What would you consider the soundtrack to our generation?
Well, I would say for me personally, it was Oasis and hip hop of the 90s. But in general, as a generation, there's also a mix, like with all these trashy 90s music that are still, where the parties are getting big, the nostalgia thing. The techno stuff from Berlin was a big thing, but I have to think about it. That's maybe a topic for another episode.
I think that is a topic for another episode.
I have, for Age the Best, I think the same as Age the Worst, and that is the concept of an album. I think, as mentioned before, how powerful this is as a collective of tracks that are meant to be together is bringing so much joy into music. And just to sit down for just an hour or 40 minutes or however long an album is, creates a lot of fun. And it also aged the worst because it doesn't really exist anymore.
No. Do you have a song that you think aged the best?
I have to say it is Smells Like Teen Spirit, because it will always be a hit. So even I heard it too much. As I mentioned, it's also not the favorite song of the album for me. But as a song, I think still in 50 years, this will be a hit.
I could see that too. I still think for aging, if you were to release the album right now, I think Come As You Are and Something in the Way would be the big hits right now.
Yeah, that's a good take. Yeah. And what is really good, also what I enjoyed today, is to listening now to the Unplugged of Nirvana, which was also massively big.
The MTV Unplugged.
The MTV Unplugged. That is my favorite record of them. It's so good to listen to. So that this is I can highly recommend to listen to that too. How is it rated today? Properly, underrated, quite correctly rated?
I kind of rated it in a few different ways.
Mm-hmm.
I rated it as influence and on music in general,
mm-hmm.
because it's considered a classic. So I think if you're looking at a classic, you need to see how has this affected music
mm-hmm.
and the music industry. And for that, it's a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Where people were even saying that then. In Rolling Stone, they wrote, Nevermind finds Nirvana at the crossroads. Scrappy Garageland warriors setting their sights on a land of giants. So you see these reviews saying this could be a huge thing. And in the end, it was. They kind of surpassed the giants. They moved into like music god status.
Yeah.
So I think when it comes to like album presence, how much it affected the industry in general, that's like a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
The actual album, still can't stand his voice at all. It annoyed me so much through every single listening. The stupid chorus on his guitar annoyed me throughout the whole album. Every time it would come on, I was just like, oh, not again. But what I really enjoyed was I really loved the production quality. And when you listen with earbuds or headphones and you actually pay attention to what they do with like left, right, center,
mm-hmm.
I love listening to how an engineer uses the panning.
Yeah.
And they do really interesting things with like doubling up vocals and just the way that they would have guitars like the guitar moving all over the place in some songs. The production and engineering was, I thought, fantastic. And for that, if you take away the voice and the chorus, a lot of places gave them like a 4 to 5 star, like somewhere in between there. I'd probably say like 8 out of, I would say 8 to 8.5 out of 10 overall, which falls basically where lots of people were giving them 4 to 5. So probably even.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think it's probably rated also right now as it is seen today as a classic because of valuable reasons. One is that it's had such a big impact on the society in general, that it was the gateway for, I think, alternative music and that's college rock stuff into mainstream. So because of that, there were so many more bands and good music afterwards, as we mentioned. I think even when I'm not a musician on my own, you can feel that there are 3 very good musicians at work during that album. So it's technically good, but they knew what they're doing and what they wanted to do. It's still not it's also, I would say, you have that with that voice. I like his voice, but it's not an album that you can listen every day to because of its aggression, I think. I don't know if it's for me also when it's a 10, it's the biggest part, and I'm going through that what you just said. I would also give it an 8, and I think it's the all over picture that music critics and fans have it's quite a good one for that. Yeah.
Like you said, wouldn't listen to them every day, but structurally good songs. They sound good.
Yeah.
Few that don't, for my ears.
And I think it also gave us the chance to discover the Foo Fighters, which I think it's a very good band, and they have a couple of albums that you can listen even more to because they're maybe not that aggressive even when it's rock and roll. and also one of the better bands in the last 30 years.
Heck of a live show.
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah, should we wrap it up?
Yeah, let's wrap it up. So we both agree 8 out of 10. 10 out of 10 for influence.
Yeah.
Aged well, but also because, like you said, because of the concept of making a complete album that you can listen to from front to back, and it's a whole concept, would not fly today.
Yeah.
In general. What do you think? Any last thoughts about Nevermind?
Not on Nevermind, just that it was super fun to have that process, and thinking about it and now talking about it was even the most fun. Yeah, that's what it should be about. So good start. And maybe we can say what the next album is, which is a totally different one.
Going completely different spectrum for the next one.
Yeah, not less influential, I think, and not less important. And that will be Marvin Gaye's What's Going On.
Also, possibly a voice of a generation.
Yeah, and that's for sure a voice that you like. I'm pretty sure about that.
Oh yeah, I love Marvin Gaye. I've listened to this album I think 2 weeks ago, from front to back, with a 4.5-year-old standing in the same room discussing everything with me, which was interesting.
Perfect.
That'll be a good modern ear to get a point of view from. She did one of these ones, a big X for Nirvana, so.
Oh, okay.
No go, Daddy. No, I don't like. Like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
But she likes hip hop, so.
Yeah, she's more also a hip hop R&B girl, I think, right?
She's a total hip hop girl. Hip hop and DJs. But yeah. Okay, so next week or next show, Marvin Gaye, What's Going On? Any last words, Barrick?
Thanks for the dialogue. Thanks for listening. If there's any listener out there, and take care.
Anyone listening other than our families and friends? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Follow us on Instagram. We have an Instagram for the podcast. That is the Modern Ear Podcast on Instagram. And we'll post when the next episode is coming up. Until next time, then.
And bye.